students, and community guests. Thank you all for joining the evening division and Professor Bell's Law and Racism class for What About the Knee on Her Neck? Today's event is a women's history program featuring a dynamic panel of fierce female change agents who will empower and teach us gender disparity and who women really are. Throughout the program, we welcome you to utilize the chat box to share comments, thoughts, and questions. But as you do, please keep in mind that we have an audience comprised of both youth and adults. So let's be mindful as we utilize the chat. Again, thank you all for joining us. We hope this event will transform each of us and create partnerships amongst us. You arrive as audience members, but you will leave as partners. Please pay close attention to the closing as Joseph will provide further guidance on how to join a partnership. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our MC for the morning, Mr. Ross.
Thank you, Whitley. As stated, my name is Johnny Ross, and I'll be your MC this morning. I would first like to introduce Ms. Jalen Landry to speak about narrative change and memorialization.
Thank you. Good morning. Before you hear from our dynamic panel of change agents, I would like to take a few minutes to provide the backstory of how the idea to memorialize these women came to life. My colleagues and I learned about the Rikers Island Memory Project in our Law and Racism class. This Rikers Island Memory Project is centered around using memorialization and narrative change to advocate for the closing of Rikers Island in New York City. Rikers Island is the world's largest penal colony, sitting on 413 acres that can accommodate up to 15,000 people. It is the last historical penal colony in the United States. However, it is not a prison. Instead, it is a series of jails. 3 organizations, Freedom Agenda, Create Forward, and Humanities Action Lab came together under the umbrella of the Rikers Island Memory Project to shed light on the inhumane treatment, deaths, and trauma stemming from the mass incarceration at Rikers Island. Through the project, over 100 oral stories were collected from those who have been detained at Rikers, their families, and those who have worked there. These memories were made visible in an effort to acknowledge and mobilize action towards repairing its generational harms and disrupting the dehumanizing narratives perpetuated about individuals incarcerated at Rikers. With a goal to repair, memorialization is the process of preserving memory and imagining a new future by erecting images and thoughts of the future we desire. Through memorialization, past trauma is recalled and brought to the forefront in an effort to begin the healing process. It is through public recognition those who were harmed can receive the redress and respect in which they are owed. This then allows for a shift in the narrative. So what is narrative? Consider this. As young children learning language, hearing the same stories told over and over again, we begin to compartmentalize these stories as facts. It becomes our truth. As we grow older, our day-to-day interactions are influenced by what we know to be true. The stories we've learned over the years are deep-rooted with powerful ideas and themes. That is the construct of narrative. Trevor Smith describes the real goal around narrative as not just simply moving someone in the short term, but it's really about shifting mindset and worldviews in the long term. And when that shift occurs, we have what's called narrative change. Narrative change is a shift in the stories that guide our values and shape how people make meaning of information and experiences. It requires knowing what narratives you're up against and putting narratives out there that counter these stories. Maya Angelou once quipped, "I have great respect for the past. If you don't know where you've come from, you don't know where you're going." The Rikers Island Memory Project used those stories they were able to capture and change the narrative so much so that Rikers Island is now projected to close in 2026. So that brings us to this moment. Why are we here? My colleagues and I thought it was imperative to memorialize the panelists before you because they too have experienced a form of trauma as they've had to navigate their respective spaces with the knee, or two for that matter, on their necks. By acknowledging their experiences in places where they've been underrepresented, underpaid, and unappreciated, we hope to not only pay homage, but to ignite a community of healing. Additionally, after hearing their stories, narrative change can commence. and we hope each of you will take on the task and be a vehicle of change in addressing those needs and the debilitating weight women feel on their necks. Thank you.
And now for the moment we've all been waiting for. I have the pleasure of introducing our first speaker, Professor Angela Bell, to begin our discussion on the knee that is placed on her neck.
Celia, a young, formerly enslaved Black woman, has joined the ancestors. The history scrolls record Celia as nothing more than a dead murderer. Today, I challenge those history books. I dare those books to tell the truth. The truth is that Celia was a child when she was purchased by Robert Newsom, a wealthy slave owner in Missouri. The truth is, Newsom wanted Celia's free labor. She was to care for his 4 daughters since his wife was deceased. The truth is that is not all that Mr. Newsom craved. He also, the 70-year-old man, wanted Celia's 14-year-old body. For 5 years, Celia yielded to the desires of her rapist. She even bore children of those multiple rapes. One day in 1855, Celia decided to remove that knee from her neck. She grabbed a fireplace log and she pounded it into Newsom's skull. And then Celia burned that cabin to the ground. A murder conviction could not even end the labor that was expected of Celia. Right before she was executed, Celia delivered a stillborn baby, another child of Newsom, her rapist. On December the 21st, 1855, Celia was hung. The community described Newsom's death as a horrible tragedy. But was it really? The answer has everything to do with perspective. It all depends on orientation. Who gets our sympathy, our empathy, our compassion in Celia's story depends on whose perspective we center. If we center Celia's perspective, she is not a murderer. Celia is a victim. In fact, Celia is a child who simply needed to defend herself. If we center Newsom's perspective, Celia is more than a murderer. She victimizes the elderly, and she is ungrateful towards those who contribute to her care. Celia's story compels us to do some very important work today, and that is the work of gender mainstreaming and perspective centering. Today, I'll be using imagery to help us understand this thing called orientation and perspective centering that I speak of. As I do my work today, I intentionally and unapologetically center the perspectives of Black women. In this country, our perspectives, our biases, our beliefs, they're largely shaped through imagery and words. And when we consume things repeatedly, those stereotypes and those narratives form. So I want us to go back now in time to some of those first images that we were likely introduced to consider the ways that they would have oriented us and shaped our perspectives. So on the screen, you see a familiar image, and there's certainly nothing wrong with the image itself. But there is a problem when a person never sees a contrasting image, or when there is one image reinforced more often than the other. And so how does this image orient us? It subtly associates the male figure in this photo with power. It suggests to us that he is the person with intellect. He's deserving somehow of greater pay, maybe greater prestige. This image also very subtly suggests that women can't or they should not be doctors, that they can't or should not hold power, that somehow she is better suited to be his assistant, that she is supposed to play the supporting role in life, and that the two genders are just not equal. Let us consider when Barbie makes her debut back in 1959, and we see next on the screen this image. Now I ask the question, what does this image encourage about hair texture? And what does this image encourage about body size? And what does this image encourage about beauty and how we should define it? Let's consider next the image of Snow White. Does this image of Snow White subtly suggest to us that white equates with innocence, and that white maybe is pure, that white is free of imperfection? As you consider this, think about the prevalence of phrases in the English language that suggest that Black is evil or Black is somehow imperfect. Things like Black as sin, the Black sheep, Black magic. Now we understand, I hope, that there is an orientation toward treating women inequitably. But what happens when she is both woman and she is Black? So what you see now is Professor Kimberly Crenshaw's face. She is a Black female law professor, and she provides that answer for us today. She coined this term intersectionality back in 1989. And you see on the screen an explanation here that tells us intersectionality acknowledges that everyone has unique experiences with discrimination. And as you see illustrated on the right side of the screen, that discrimination can impact us because of our gender, because of sexuality, age, any of these 12 factors we see. But what happens with intersectionality, it ends the denial about the fact that different groups experience discrimination differently. Intersectionality forces an analysis of those power imbalances. It helps us see where those power imbalances lock and collide. Now, I want us to focus a little on this next image and the lessons it teaches us about this intersectionality doctrine. Here we see two marginalized people. And I want us to focus first on the left, the white female image. Now this image is communicating clearly to the world that there is a standard of normalcy when it comes to appearance and body size and hair texture and hair length, and everybody now must be measured against her. There is also some hint here in this image that the woman on the left is valuable. And what do we do with those things that we value? Well, we protect them and we guard them. It also suggests that she can't be overwhelmed by tasks. She needs help sometimes, and she's given a caregiver. Despite all of these privileges and advantages that is associated with the group on the left, we should not forget that she is still a victim of a power imbalance when she is measured against the male. But now let's focus to the image on the right and begin to notice where the Black woman is. She is behind her. She is in her shadows, literally and metaphorically. So what does this image tell us about Black woman? She's docile, she's the servant. Maybe we should notice the body contrast. She's portly, she's asexual. She is the caretaker. She lives to serve other people. She is a perpetual giver. Self-care or gratification, they just don't exist in her universe. She's only alive for labor. Her labor is even free, and her labor can be exploited. Now, I want to remind you, in addition to all those things I said about her, she is also a victim of this power imbalance when she is measured against the male. But what happens when you measure the white female and the Black female? We see this doctrine of intersectionality now, where race and gender collide to compound oppression. I want us to think now about another frequent depiction of Black women. So if you see this screen, images like this communicate to the world that Black women are angry and they're confrontational, they're hostile, They're aggressive. Do these images maybe cause the world to anticipate this when they see her? Do they make others feel like it is their civic duty to put her in her place? Let's consider another image that we associate with Black women. Does this image suggest that she is a baby mama, that not a person we would ever take seriously, that her body is her commodity, never, of course, her brains? What about this image that we see next? Does it suggest that Black women have this insatiable appetite for sex with anyone at any time? Now, I want to focus on how these stereotypes have found their way into my orbit, which is the academic and professional setting. They show up in what I call the invisibility doctrine. And on the screen, you see this manifested because there is this photo that the Associated Press showed the entire global community after an environmental summit. But the next screen shows the real photo, not the one that they circulated to the world. And you notice there is a different face on the left. The face on the left was cropped out of the photo that went around the globe. And it tells us that she is the victim of this invisibility that I speak of. I've seen this happen when those in power attempt to erase the impactful work of women of color. How do they do that? They just crop her out of her history. They don't acknowledge her contribution. They won't memorialize her accomplishments. Meanwhile, they support and promote others. So when the opening comes, they can justify excluding the female. Another way I see the stereotypes manifest is through what I call the civic duty to put her in her place. And what you see now here is the image of Doe Mapp from the famous criminal procedure case, Mapp versus Ohio. When the police tried to enter her home without a warrant, this Black woman stood with her back erect. She was direct, and she was unapologetic, and more importantly, she was right. And if you see the next screen, you see what she got. Doe Mapp was met with force that day. Later, the Supreme Court vindicated her, but by then, those in power had long made their point about what was due to women who spoke back. I want you to think about this next slide, because guess what happened to Sandra Bland? She received the same. Are these stereotypes causing Black women who are not submissive, those who are confident, those who are competent, those who are self-assured, to be put in their places by those in power? Which begs the question of what are those stereotypes causing to happen to the women who meet the expectation of these gender stereotypes? The ones who portray themselves as faithful, the ones who aim to please, or those who serve the egos of those in power or the sexual needs of those in power. My experience is that they're not put in their place, they're rewarded. They're even celebrated for being good girls. And I've seen these gender stereotypes impact performance evaluations. There is an irrefutable body of research establishing that gender stereotypes influence the way women are evaluated by both peers and students. There is also research suggesting that women of color often suffer lower performance evaluations because their words and their approaches are presumed to be angry or inappropriate. On this next screen, I want to talk to you about the way I've seen these stereotypes dictate the way I am addressed. Sometimes students even select courses based on these stereotypes. Some of the students simply choose to refer to female professors as Mrs. and not professor as they would address their male colleagues. Sometimes they avoid courses taught by professors who are female or of color because of the presumption that we simply could not be intellectuals or possess any knowledge. I've also seen these stereotypes at play in the publishing world. Zora Neale Hurston speaks to us about that. She talks about how women of color sometimes have challenges getting their work published because the publishing community feels their stories are just irrelevant and unworthy of being told. Or sometimes they can't get book advances at the rate of their male counterparts. And so what you see next is an explanation of how we may approach a solution. It is called gender mainstreaming. And gender mainstreaming is a strategy for helping us realize gender equality finally in this country. It involves the integration of a gender perspective into everything we do, such as the laws that we write and the policies we implement and the budgets, the way we design and advertise, the way we monitor and evaluate. It requires us to do things with a view of promoting equality between women and men and combating discrimination at the same time. It centers the woman's perspective. Gender mainstreaming would have gotten that knee off of Celia's neck, and it can get the knee off of yours too. Thank you.
To continue our discussion on the knee that is placed on her neck, I would like to introduce our next guest speaker, Dr. Velva Bowles.
Wow, thank you so much for that, Angela. I didn't know exactly how I was going to get started, but you opened the door wide open. Because of I am so honored to be asked to come today and to speak, and I will respect your time limit. And in doing so, let me do what I'm going to call a catalog of things, identifying some of the vicissitudes that I've endured, and then to address the agenda as you laid it out, Dr. Bell. I want to be able to talk about empowerment. I don't want to just talk about the woes, but how I've compensated and what I'd like to say to the young women now facing similar things that are still happening. Please, young women, know it hasn't stopped. I start in my story, when I look at childhood, I certainly grew up with the stereotypic thinking that women were subordinate to men, that we were to be subject to their whim. And when I was talking to people who could help me advance academically, I expressed I wanted to be a jet pilot. That was my first dream. And I had a room full of people laugh at me and said, women don't fly jets. That was simple, just dismissed. Then I said, well, I think I want to be a doctor. They said, oh no, women are nurses. They're nurses or they're teachers. They're not doctors. Then with that social assault to my everyday life, going to school, I was one of the integration persons. I was the as I say, fly in the buttermilk, thrown into all white situations, because I learned there were those who thought I could handle it. They're saying, oh, she can prove, she can go. No one really looked at what it is to be thrown into an adverse environment, constantly watched with expectation of those who put you there to excel, and with the expectation of those observing you to see you fail. So that alone is a trauma I haven't heard any of us integrationalists talk about, but I can tell you there were wounds, there were scars, there were injuries. Just to highlight them, I was spitballed on the school bus. Now, for those who don't know what that is, they chew up some paper until it gets soft, and then they take it and throw it and hit it. I had spit run down my glasses, because I wore glasses at the time, into my hair, and I had no defense. The school bus driver didn't care, the teachers didn't care, and I'd get to school and have to go and wash my face and get someone else's saliva out of my hair and off my skin before I was expected to compete equitably in the classroom. That's just a sampling of the kind of trauma endured to get to school. Once in school, they had closed a number of neighborhood Black schools in the time that I was attending secondary school, and I was integrated into one of the largest white schools in the area. The principal was overtly prejudiced. Now, I don't know if we can use the N-word, so I won't quote him directly, but he canceled the junior senior prom for 2 years because he did not want Black boys dancing with white girls at his school. So I never attended a prom because of that. Also, because I was a little bit more aggressive than many, I wrote for the school paper, and I wrote an article about the prejudiceness of our principal and his viewpoint. And with that, I was not allowed to sit for any of my senior exams. And it appeared I wouldn't graduate high school. But prior to his decision not to allow me to sit for exams, I had taken the SAT scored high enough that I won the National Merit Scholarship, so that it was embarrassing to the school if I didn't graduate. So I ended up taking every one of my final exams over an 8-hour period sitting in the superintendent's office. And I'm telling you, those of you who know about a 3-hour exam or a 2-hour exam, imagine the trauma of a 16-year-old trying to complete an entire year's performance by exam so she could walk across the stage. I was grade-wise valedictorian, but they said they could not allow, and I'm gonna smile again, a Black person to be valedictorian. So they allowed me to do the invocation and the closing on stage. And then everybody had a bit of egg on the face when the National Merit Committee sent someone to acknowledge me at the graduation. I didn't even know the status. I had no clue. I was traumatized, but I was very dedicated to finishing high school. I never shared this with my parents because I was embarrassed. I didn't want them to think I wasn't going to graduate. I didn't know the travesties were against me and that I should have had support from whomever in the community. I literally walked to the superintendent's office the morning that I didn't know I would sit for 6 hours, or actually closer to 8 hours, to take every exam one after the other in order to get my high school diploma. I did, and I'm glad, but that's one of the scars that I still wear. I went to North Carolina State University, which, as you may know, it doesn't have a large Black population. It's mostly engineers and so forth. A reason I bring that up, the mandatory dormitory stay was that you couldn't change rooms, but within the first week, you had to try to acclimate to your roommate. And that was my first experience of just overt prejudice. There was a young white female sat on the floor just crying, and I administered to her, trying to make her, what's going on? What's wrong? Are you hurt? I ran down the hall. I said, this young lady is crying. Somebody help me. So they came in, and finally I found out what was wrong. And she said, and again, the N-word, I can't sleep in this bedroom with a Black person, and she'd rather sleep on the floor in another person's room than to sleep in the bed in the dorm room that we were assigned. That was an eye-opener. That was the beginning of my college career. And I won't regale you with the multitude of difficulties in the dormitory. There were 1,200 women in the dorm. 3 of us were women of color. My first academic trial was I was taking a science history course. I love history. I'm a student in a lot of ways. And I remember that we were given student numbers. We didn't have names. You put your number on the paper and they would turn it in. And I'd get all these accolades on my essays. Good point, well thought out. And then the grade would be 71 D. Well, I was on a scholarship. I had to have better than a 3.5. I wouldn't have money to go to school. So I finally went to the dean and I asked, I don't understand. Read the paper. And he looked at it. I'll call his name, Dean Brown. I was really, he was shocked. He said, I don't know what's going on. So he called a professor, and I'm sure he's dead by now. It's Dr. Motov. And he came in walking with a cane. I remember the step. You could hear his footstep and his cane hitting something out of a horror film. I'm sure Steven Spielberg could use how that sounded as I waited in the dean's office. And when he got there, Dean Brown said, I've reviewed the students' papers and I agree. These are good comments, and whoever's graded, which were graduate students, I presume. He says, I can't see how she would do less than a 90 on any of this work. And most of them are 71. At North Carolina State, a 70 was a D. And so the fellow stood up and looked at the dean. Of course, I don't have to tell you, both were white men. And he said, no, and I won't quote, but the N-word was used, will receive better than a D in my course now or ever. So he then got up and left the room, and I didn't know what to say. I'm looking at who was supposed to be the highest ranking person in the science department of my department, and he was red-faced, and he started saying, "I can let you drop this course with a B." And I said, "I need an A. I'm here on fellowship. 3.5 is my QPA has to be, and a B is a 3.0." And I was devastated. I said, "This is two-part course." He says, "Well, Dr. Martoff teaches both parts. I said, change my major." So I hope that illustrates just how destitute. I had no one to call. I didn't know what to do. I could drop the course. I ended up, I think he gave me B+ because I need a 3.5, but the part 2 of that course I couldn't take because that professor had declared that I could never get better than a D in his course. So that's undergraduate. Let me just jump on. I went to Westinghouse. Was the first major job I had. I went in as a junior officer, I think as a GS6, if those of you know government rating. But I was ambitious. I talked to my supervisor and said, "How do I get promoted? Da, 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 da." Well, I was hired in on a special task. For those of you who might know the Navy, USS Enterprise had a problem in the secondary side. I always loved chemistry. We were hired in as what was called the JAC team. They 13 people, pretty much handpicked us with metallurgists. We were material specialists and so forth. And then I realized that there were 13 of us, 12 were men, white, and me. And then when I asked my supervisor more questions, I realized that I got hired $300 less per month than any of them. And when I approached and said, "I don't understand this," here was the explanation. I mean, it wasn't even an apology. The explanation is, well, he's married and his wife is pregnant. And so I said, "But we're doing the same work. In fact, I'm doing more because I'm the chemist and we're trying to identify the chemical assault that's going on." So that was one of my first eye-opener of inequities. I went to Duquesne University and got a master's degree in physical chemistry and inorganic chemistry so I could come back and strike back and said, "Now I have an advanced degree and I demand that I get recognized." Thank goodness, Naval Reactors, there was an officer there in the Navy who recognized some things, and I got shepherded a bit because of that. Let me move on. After Westinghouse, I went to medical school. I had always wanted to go to medical school. If you remember as a child, that's what I told them. And I didn't know about MCATs. This is just how naive in a small town, North Carolina. I didn't know about MedCats. I didn't know about prepping for professional school. And when I first went to University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine and told the lady I wanted to register to go to college there, she said, "Well, what was your MCAT score?" I didn't know what MCAT was. So I had to go and look up that acronym and find out what it was, and then learn it was what, $400 to register for the test, and then learn it was a 2-day test. So all of that was uphill to me, but I did it. I fought for it, and I was the first Black female to get accepted in the MD PhD program at University of Pittsburgh, which is a private Jewish university. A number of stories there. The highlight is I also wrote for the paper. It's called "Wearing the Short White Jacket," and I talked about the challenges of being a medical student at the University of Pittsburgh. Then from there, I went to graduate school at Colorado State in Fort Collins, Colorado. Those of you who don't know, it was known as a white bread state. What does that mean? When I moved there, I modified the statistics of the city for populations. In other words, there were very, 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 very few Black people. And I was in the Biochemistry Department of Colorado State. A lot of stories there, but for sake of time, let me move on. Once I had finished the graduate work, I went to Tulane Medical Center, and I thought, okay, I'm on the other side of bad. I'm now a professional. I have the MD, I have my PhD, I'm ready now to do my residency. Ha, 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 joke was on me. I wore the micro braids at the time. And I remember my first rotation in Big Charity ER. For those of you who don't know, if you check Big Charity, she has quite a history. A lot of people trained there. I was called in by the medical director. And here's what she said to me. You have those dread things on your head. So when you're talking to patients, don't look at them because they will think you're a militant. Look at the floor. I was so shocked that someone literally articulated that, that I went to my MedPeds director and told her, and this was my first introduction to gay, because I didn't really have exposure to trans and gay in a small city. And my director looked at me and said, I understand, my wife and I are often mistreated. And I just froze because I didn't know how to proceed because I didn't understand what she was telling me. And I spoke, and she and I guess she never forgave me. I said, yes, you may have a female for a partner, but no one has to know that unless you tell them. I said, I'm Black all the time. And she didn't like that retort, and we were not friends. I got through the medical center. I enjoyed the training. They had great training there. But when I passed through that, it wasn't over. I began working with the Tesh Action Clinic system in Louisiana, opening clinics all over the state, 64 parishes. And I was assigned to a place called Edgard, Louisiana. And I walked into an area that had a Confederate flag on the wall, and it was a sheriff's office. And I was told to request that they construct a clinic for me in this small city because it was such poor healthcare information. And that was a challenge. So that was certainly, language was exchanged. But the good news is I got the job done. The clinic is still running. So I wanted to just talk about some of the injuries, the trauma. You hear me laugh, but it's no laughing matter. One of the things you wanted us to address, Professor Bell, was how did we cope? My first thing is to tell you, if you don't have a system, and I didn't, no foundation. I could tell my mother, she said, read the 23rd Psalm in the Bible. She meant well, I know. And I did read that, but it didn't address my issues. I didn't have a mentor. I didn't know organizations that could help me. There were no sororities on white universities that I attended, so I didn't even have the support of a potential fraternity / sorority. So who did I depend on? I learned to look at myself in the mirror. I mean, literally. And if I had to cry, I watched the tears. And when they finish, I tell them, okay, now wipe them up and let's go do something else. I tell people I slept on a wet pillow many nights, and it's true. But I learned how not to let my voice shake when that lump came into my throat and someone adversarial was talking to me. I learned that if I talk quieter, softened my voice, it hurt less. And it made them have to listen more closely to me. I did have some situations where, because I reached out to others, a number of white women at Westinghouse, when I was working in marketing, I would select them to work with me on different proposals. As fate would have it, one who was an administrator at University of Pittsburgh who actually called me when she found out someone had put something in my file, something I would have never known had she not, who was doing discovered and knew who I was, to contact me. So there can be some hidden gems and angels if you are kind and supportive to those around you. So for the sake of time, what will I say to what do I wish I knew? I wish I knew there were others that I could have reached out to. I wish I had a resource. I wish that I knew a Professor Bell or someone that I could have called and had them say, hey, look, stay, you're doing the right thing. Sometimes all you need them to say is stay your course. Or if you're crying, you say, go ahead, honey, cry. I'm here. I want to hear it. When you're done, we'll talk. You just need that. It's not that someone needs to carry your burden or pick up your weight. And that's my voice to my Black male compadres. That sometimes men, and I have had some wonderful male, most of my world is in the male dominated, wonderful male comrades who wants to fix it for me, who wants to come and run interference, want to come and deal with it. And I appreciate it. That is marvelous to think that you got my back, but don't do it. How can you help me? If I need you to rest your hand on my shoulder, put your hand on my shoulder. If I need you to hold me for a few minutes, As they say, what's the song? Until the crying subsides, do that. But then turn me loose and let me go. Don't try to stop me. Don't say, oh, you do too much. Oh, stop that. Or why don't you? Or let's get married. That's not what I'm asking for. That's not supportive. If we're cohabitating and you can wash the dishes and you know I like a clean kitchen, do that for me. You know, do the things that will help me mentally and not stop me in my tracks. Don't stand between me and my hardships. Just give me enough strength to manage them. Finally, message to the empowering young woman: you are as strong as you believe you are. And I repeat that, you are as strong as you believe you are. If you say to me, I can't do it, like Henry Ford says, you're right, you can't do it. But if you look at me and said, nothing's going to stop me, you'll get it done. And when someone says that to me, call my number anytime, because if you got that much grit in the game, I got your traction. So that's my position. And that's what I'd like to share.
Thank you, Dr. Bowles. I now have the pleasure of introducing our next guest speaker, Ms. Sharon Levine, to continue our discussion on the knee that is placed on her neck.
Hello, can you all hear me? Okay, now I'm on. It's my pleasure to meet you all and to be here. And I don't know where to begin. So you just want me to start when I first started doing the works? Would that be an appropriate place to speak? Hello, can you all hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you.
Okay. Well, I started doing the work that I'm doing right now, started in 2018 to start it with the organization that I have now called Rise St. James. And I'm in the process of doing so many different things. At this moment, we're in the process of suing our public officials for not protecting us in Cancer Alley, where I'm from. I live in St. James Parish, 5th District, all my life. And I taught school for 38 years. I taught special ed. I enjoyed teaching that. And I was told today at a dinner for this young man who has cancer. That's where I was before I came to the phone. And one of the little girls that I taught, the lady was in the line and she said, a little girl graduated. She still called on me. She tell her mother that she want to see me so I can teach her math. She's special ed. She's so sweet. That's just one of the things I endure doing the work that I'm doing, because when I taught school, I taught with passion. I loved what I was doing and I hated to quit, but it was a calling from God that got me into the fight that I am in today. And I'm in my home, walking around trying to get some things done, because I've been out of my home for a year, almost 2 years now, because of Hurricane Ida. So that's why I was back and forth to my house and to my daughter's house. So I graduated from Southern University in 1976. I went to grad school, got my master's and my plus 30. I was married for 22 years. I have 6 children and 12 grandchildren. And when I started doing the works that I'm doing, I had no idea what I would be doing. I was self-taught. I read articles. I learned about this environmental work. And I've been targeted by individuals. And my grandson is being targeted now and in the last 2 weeks. And I had to call a police officer to give him a statement of what was going on with that. That's a different issue. But when I started doing the works, I came into this work because of Formosa Plastics. Formosa Plastics wanted to come into my neighborhood 2 miles from my home. We already have one 3 miles from my home, and this would make one even closer to my home. I was told that you don't fight industry. I was told that when the governor approves something, it's a done deal. And I was told not to do this. But God called me to do this. I didn't set out to do the work that I'm doing. And as I started to do the work, I was told that I'm an activist. And I said, no, I'm not. I'm just an ordinary person. I'm trying to live and breathe clean air and drink clean water. And I said, you say I'm an activist. I don't say I'm an activist. So it grew on me. But as I started to do the work, I've learned so much. And I learned how they choose Black and brown poor areas to dump the dirt on, to dump the filth on, to dump the chemicals in our drinking water. I learned all of these things. And the only way we can get through all of this is by going through the law. But first, I went to God before I started. I sat on my front porch and I poured out my heart to God and told God, do you want me to stay here? And he told me no. I asked him if he wanted me to sell a home, the home that he gave me. And he told me no. And from that moment, I was transformed, literally transformed into another person. So when I started, I had to figure out what I was going to do. I love teaching, and I had to make a choice. So the choice was to go where God wanted me to be. This is what he wants me to do. And I feel like I know I will be successful. So far, we have already stopped for most of plastics. In 2019, we stopped a Chinese plant called Wanwan. We stopped that in its track. They packed up and left. Last year in September, we stopped South Louisiana Methanol. They wanted to be built 1,500 feet away from our park, the only park that we have in the 5th district. So we fought that. They went to the Army Corps of Engineers. They told them to go back and do their application all over again. So they got disgusted and they pulled out in September of last year. Then Judge Trudy White ruled that Formosa Plastics and LDEQ was at fault for wanting to be built in St. James, where they have 12 industries already in a 10-mile radius, right down my highway. And she said, in other words, like it was inhumane for what they were trying to do to us. And it was 10 counts, and she ruled in our favor on all 10 counts. So Formosa is so stubborn and so shamed that we did this to them. So they judged, they appealing Judge Trudy White's decision. Like she don't know what she's talking about. So now she stepped down. I don't know why she stepped down, but we're still going to win this fight. The more they go after us and tell us they're going to put it here, the more we fight. First of all, we're fighting our public officials. They are the reason we are dying. They are the reason we are suffering. We're about to do an assessment of this area, 4th and 5th district. We're about to do an assessment of how many people have died because of industry and the ones that are sick and suffering because of industry. So we're starting on that tomorrow. We're going to make the announcement in 2 or 3 churches, and people will sign up, and we're going to see where we're going to go from there. We also getting public records from our clerk of court office on Wednesday. They're putting us through hoops so we don't get those records. God already told me there's something in those records, and I know it is. So we're going after them because they didn't try to protect us, and because they are the ones that's permitting these companies to come in here. When they ask to put it in a white neighborhood, they vote no. When they say put it in a Black neighborhood, they say yes. 4th and 5th district, but the 5th district has the most. We were approached by a lady that's working for this company, and they asked her to be the liaison between us and the company. The company name is DG Fuels. It's a jet fuel company, and they said they won't admit that much chemicals. We said, no, we don't want anyone in here that's going to continue to poison us. I have a friend right now that's fighting bone cancer. He's on his last leg. And I have one today that they have a supper for. He has really bad cancer. I have a friend of mine. We went to school together. She's fighting liver cancer. I can go on and on and on, give you a whole list right now that's dying. I have pictures that I'm looking at in my living room right now of one of the fighters from Rice St. James in the beginning. And I have another lady in the same area where she's from. She and I sat on her porch. She have a trailer. She lives in between two industries. She lived between Marathon and New Star. That lady told me that she is tired of breathing the toxic air. She's tired of breathing the toxic air, and she's asked me to help her. It was heartbreaking. What do I know to do to help her? All I could do is spread the word, bring awareness to the world, to tell them what's going on with these people. This lady died, giving me her testimony, and she died because she couldn't breathe the filth that was going through her window. When she closed the window in the summertime, it's hot. So when you open the window, you got the fume coming in through her house. New Star put a rail behind in the back, and that would shake her trailer. Her trailer would shake, and she would be so afraid, she told me. So I've been to DC to talk to the subcommittee, environmental committee. When I first started in 2019, one of the senators told me, he was so arrogant. After I finished speaking, we all had 5 minutes to speak. It was 5 of us from different areas of the world, of the United States, I mean. And one of them with his arrogant self. They had 5 minutes to ask us questions. And he said, "Oh, Miss Levine, I wish you luck on stopping Formosa." Like he know we're not going to stop it. I wish I could find his name. I don't remember his name. And I'll let him know we're almost there. We're just about to stop it, continue to stop it, because we did stop it. Judge Trudy White ruled that it wouldn't come in here. And then they're appealing it. So we're waiting on them with the appeal. We haven't made on nothing. Our attorneys are waiting. So I think that they are ashamed because we stopped them. And so, I don't know, it's heartbreaking to sit up here and tell you my story, but this is my life right now. My life has changed. I don't have time to spend with my grandchildren anymore. I'm busy. I'm trying to get security on my home because I know they're looking at me, they're targeting me. So many people in the organization, they don't want to talk, they don't want to put their name on anything. So they tell me that God gave you the vision, so you do it. So we wanted to do a billboard. They were afraid to put their picture on the billboard. So I put mine on a billboard. I don't care. I have signs all over my yard. I don't care, because God is going to protect me. And I'm not going to sit down and let somebody come take my community. It's just like somebody coming in your home and say, "You get out." I'm taking it. You get nothing. No one is. Our community is already like a skeleton. And we've been targeted. I didn't know these things until after Governor Edward announced in April of 2018. I was in my classroom and my daughter called me and she said, "Mama, the governor's on TV right now announcing a plant coming in St. James." I said, "A plant coming in St. James?" I said, "No, we got to stop this. We can't have it anymore." So I was so upset that day. So when I went home, I kept my TV on so I could see for myself. And our local officials that live in St. James Parish were over there celebrating with these people from Taiwan. And my heart broke. I prayed, I cried, and I thought I had to leave. But now, since God gave me the strength and the courage, I can go up against anything and anyone. And no one is going to take my community, and no one is going to target my grandson. This is not going to happen. It's not. I talked to officials today. I went to a breakfast this morning with ministers, and some of the ministers they were talking about me, because that's what happened to me when God changed me. I don't know how long I have to talk, but I don't want to take up all of the time because I know other people have to speak. But I'm so glad that I'm speaking with my alma mater. Southern University. I love Southern, and I can't wait to come to the classrooms to speak with you all so y'all can help me, give me ideas, strategies on what I should do, make sure I'm going in the right direction, especially with the legal aspects of things. Because Southern University is when I went to Southern one night, I think was in October of 2018. And I talked to the NAACP and Stephanie Anthony on the phone, and she told me to come. And I told her, oh no. And she talked for about an hour. She convinced me. So I went to Southern to the conference. And that's when I started to meet so many people. So my daughter and I stood up there nervous and scared, but we were telling our story. We was not that nervous where we couldn't tell the story because we were hurt and we were devastated at what they want to do to us. So the people over there were so nice to us. They welcomed us, came back the next day, and we spoke even more. And I don't know, that Southern University just gave me that boost. I mean, I felt so good just being in the presence of people at Southern University. And I don't know, it's just Stephanie Anthony came, Mike McCallahan came to my house for the next meeting. So we met in my garage and they showed us how to organize. We didn't know anything about that. I taught school, I didn't organize anything. So after they left, a few days later, we had our first march. And we marched on a sidewalk because the police officer told me we couldn't march on a highway because the Sunshine Bridge was under construction. So on November the 3rd, we had our first march, a week after we talked with Stephanie Anthony and Mike McCallahan. They helped us to organize it. And then a year or so later, I found out he lied to me. I could have marched on a highway. He told me I could march on the sidewalk. He can't tell me that anymore. You can't tell me nothing anymore. I know my rights. And now when I call the police department, they jump. Because when they did that to my grandson, the lady told me that they didn't have anyone. They only had 2 officers on duty and they were working an accident. I told her, I said, well, I need him to come now. She said, well, what's the issue? I said, my grandson's sitting up here crying because they're trying to mess with him. And he's crying because they left him in the field one day and he had to run back home with the mud and everything. And he was crying and all dirty. Then because he don't have a go-kart. So we bought him a go-kart. After he bought the go-kart, it got worse. The prejudiced neighbors that next to my daughter. So they was fussing about the land and stuff. So in 10 minutes, after I told him my name, 10 minutes or less, the police officer was coming down the driveway. And I told him what happened. And then the neighbors saw him talking to us. They came out there fussing, racing, saying. And the police officer told him, go back in the house. I'm going to come to you. He went to my daughter. They recorded it. My daughter showed him where the stakes were and explained everything to him that it wasn't there before. They just put it there this morning. So he went to the white neighbors, talked to them. He came back and accused my daughter of being an angry Black woman because she was standing up for herself. So we're going to file a complaint with the sheriff's office next week because she worked and I was working. My schedule was so tight this week. So we going to file a complaint on Monday. But I could go on and on, but I'm going to stop right now. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask me anything.
All right, thank you so much, Ms. Levine. Without further ado,
You're welcome.
I would thank you. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome retired Chief Justice of the Louisiana Supreme Court, Ms. Burnett Joshua Johnson, to the Zoom stage to continue our discussion.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, wonderful. This has been an outstanding morning. And thank you so much to the students at Southern University Law Center, to Professor Allen, and to all of the, to Professor Angela Bell, and to all of the outstanding speakers here this morning for their testimony. And I'm just sitting here reflecting on all of your journeys in terms of which, where you've been. And of course, I'll be 80 years old this year. And of course, I can't tell you all of my trauma over 80 years. I'll just tell you some of it. I grew up, of course, in a segregated New Orleans, born in Donaldsonville, grew up in New Orleans, but of course, when I grew up in New Orleans, everything was segregated. Segregated schools. I graduated from a segregated high school, went to Spelman College, and then decided to go to LSU Law School. LSU Law School was desegregated in 1954 when Dutch Moriel and Robert Collins were the first two Black students to attend. And it took a lawsuit to accomplish that. I got to LSU Law School in the fall of 1965. Camille Gray and I were the first two Black women to attend LSU Law School, and everything is a challenge. You've got to fight for everything. The law school would still be segregated in terms of race and gender unless you make the effort to desegregate it. So we've got to fight tooth and nail for everything. We can't buckle under pressure. You can't, as Ms. Levine said, you can't back down from a challenge. You've got to demand a seat at the table. And this is what we're all fighting for and what we're all talking about. Of course, when I got to LSU, they had not had a Black student. I did not know that there would be another Black student at LSU when I got there. I had gone to Spelman College. Camille Gray had gone to Indiana University. She did not know I would be there, and I did not expect her. But we both wound up first-year law students at LSU, so we were study partners, and graduated from LSU Law School. When I got back to New Orleans, of course, the opportunities in the practice were different, and we know that now. The law schools did not really open up until World War II, when men went off to war, and there was some seats in the law school, and all of a sudden, some of the law schools began to admit men. And you'll hear that in the stories of Sandra Day O'Connor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Constance Baker Motley. The men were at war, and so they allowed women to attend law school. We saw it in the factories during the war. You know, the Rosie the Riveter, the men are off at war, and so you have a chance to work in factories and make a decent wage with a job. Of course, all of that changed when the men got back from the war. But there have always been barriers in the profession in terms of race and gender. And of course, I'll focus some first on the legal profession in terms of barriers. Sandra Day O'Connor finished first in her class from Stanford University, and they offered her a job as a secretary. Constance Baker Motley, who's one of my heroes, she rose, grew up in New Haven, Connecticut. Her family was a family of immigrants from the Caribbean island of Nevis, Nevis. I had a great pleasure to meet Constance Baker Motley the year I was president of the National Bar Association Judges, the Judicial Council. We had our annual meeting, and I was president that year, and she had written her autobiography, and we were there. She was signing autographs, and she was part of that big convention. But we were there to honor her for all of her work as a great civil rights lawyer, for all of the work she did for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. She graduated from high school in 1939 and had a chance to go to Columbia Law School because there were some seats. And of course, had the great opportunity to work for Thurgood Marshall at the Legal Defense Fund. When she finished law school, when I finished law school, there are very few women in law school, very few women in the profession. And even today, we see so many disparities. Although women might make up half of the student body population in law school, the issue isn't admission to law school anymore. We'll have women being admitted to the law school. The issue isn't admission to the practice anymore. And as you know, I was a civil trial judge for 10 years, and I sat on the Louisiana Supreme Court for 25 years. And one of my jobs and one of the roles as a justice, we oversee the profession in terms of the Committee on Bar Admissions and rules for admission to the practice. And I always wanted to be sure that the Committee on Bar Admission reflected the people who were taking the exam. So I wanted to be sure that there were women and there were African Americans on the Committee on Bar Admission. So we have folk now who are taking the bar, who are passing the bar. The problem is not admission to the practice anymore. The problem is retention. We're dealing with a profession now where because of the requirements by large majority firms, the demands are so intense in terms of hours, travel, and whatever else they want from young associates, that the demands are such that you've got to make a choice about whether you want to be a named partner or whether you want a family. And for some folk, the choice is, I want a family. And so they tend to back out of full-time practice. And so the American Bar Association, the National Bar Association, and other groups are trying to find a way now to retain more women in the profession. I, of course, because I had the opportunity to serve as a judge, didn't have to choose between family and the law. I was elected a trial judge in 1984. I did civil trials for 10 years, and my children could come to the court. I could have someone pick them up or pick them up, and they could come and sit at the court in the back of the courtroom or in my office and do their homework while I finish a trial, or charge a jury, or wait for a jury to return with a verdict. But sometimes, if you're in a law firm, required to travel do a trial or do some other things, you don't have those same options. When I got to Civil District Court in New Orleans, I was the only woman. I was the first woman elected at Civil District Court in 1984. And I tell people a story all the time. When I walked into the conference room, those guys thought it was a locker room. And I had to tell them, this conference room is not the men's locker room. There's some language, we've got to moderate the language. And so in the course of those years from 1984 until now, the Civil District Court in New Orleans is now majority female. If you look at the at the courts generally in Louisiana, when I was first elected, we probably had about 10 judges in the entire state. About 4 or 5 of us in New Orleans, a couple of judges in Baton Rouge, and then Judge Carl Stewart in Shreveport. Now we have over 100 Black judges in Louisiana. So we've made tremendous progress, and it's important for this reason. When women first entered the profession as trial lawyers, and a woman walked into court, the presumption was she was the secretary, because all these folks had been watching Perry Mason, and Della Street was the secretary. So the woman walks in and she's a secretary. And so now everything's changed. The woman walks in and she's in charge, and the man is the client. And so that it changes altogether, because when women first started to walk into court and you push the gate open and approach the bar and sit in front of the bar, judges are just aghast. You're sitting in the wrong place. No, I'm sitting in the right place. I'm a member of the bar. And it made a difference in the practice, because now judges, they're getting familiar with seeing women in court. And it certainly made a difference with women judges. It made a difference with African-American judges in terms of what our law firms look like around the country. Everywhere in America, folk understood that you can't really try a case and intend to succeed before a jury, especially a diverse jury. You can't really expect to succeed unless you have a law firm that is representative. And you'll see they'll bring in a team. They'd like to have a woman on the team if they're doing something that deals with domestic violence or something like that, child support or child custody. They like to have an African-American on the team if the judge is African-American. If they expect that there'll be some African-Americans on that jury, they'd like to have some presence. They'd like that jury to see them as fair and open, and so that they'll treat them fairly when they go out to deliberate. So I think that women, we've seen some tremendous progress in terms of race and gender, but there's a lot of work to be done. Certainly, there's a lot of work to be done, and I we don't take anything for granted. We know there's much to be done, and I don't want to take up more than my 15 minutes, but I do want to call to your attention two people that I like to mention during during Women's History Month. Women's History Month. Ella Baker, who was a civil rights activist, and we think about Dr. King and all he accomplished and all of the other great civil rights workers, but we never really give Ella Baker credit for all the great work that she did behind the scenes with a career that spanned 50 years. She started off working with W.E.B. Du Bois and Thurgood Marshall and Martin Luther King, graduated from Shaw University. She was the field secretary for the NAACP, and she really, really loved working with young people, worked with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and Dr. King and organizing young people. She was part of the Freedom Rides in 1961 and put together the SNCC Freedom Summer. So think about Ella Baker when you think about organizing. And for heaven's sakes, don't forget Fannie Lou Hamer. Black History Month is a month when we really should think about honoring the work of women like Fannie Lou Hamer, a voting rights activist and a great civil rights leader who I think about as one of my sheroes, born in Montgomery County, Mississippi in 1917. She was one of 20 children. And of course, that's another conference altogether to talk about women's reproductive health issues, because women have just been subjected to so many inequities in terms of infant mortality and lack of maternal care, these high birth rates have been, we've suffered since slavery. This has been the bane of Black women since we got here in America. Fannie Lou Hamer started picking cotton with her family at age 6. She learned how to read and write in a one-room schoolhouse, and when they found out how smart she was, they made her the record keeper and timekeeper on her plantation. Then she started attending conferences and voting, and learned about voting rights and civil rights, and that started her on her way. In 1961, she had a tumor removed, and the surgeon performed a hysterectomy without her consent. And she talks about that as the Mississippi appendectomy, where she uses this as the euphemism for involuntary sterilization of Black women. But be sure to honor Fannie Lou Hamer this month as we talk about women who've done great work and all over the South. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice Johnson. More things are scheduled to come with our next guest speaker, Ms. Kathy Hambrick, to continue our discussion on the knee that is placed on her neck.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you to Southern University Law Center for inviting me to be on this the panel. As I thought about the theme today, I realized that there is no knee on my neck. And before I go any further, I would like to ask for a short moment of silence in memory of our sisters who truly had more than a knee on their neck. Sandra Bland, Breonna Taylor, and the 188 women who were confirmed to have been lynched between 1838 and 1969. Now I would like to talk to you about the women who give me the strength to keep the knees off my neck. And as mentioned before by Chief Justice Johnson, of course, Ella Baker, who inspired the work of Marian Wright Edelman, who is the founder of the Children's Defense Fund. And if you've never heard of Marian Wright Edelman, I'd like for all of you who are listening today to study her work and to look at the work with the thousands of children across America with her freedom schools that have been developed in rural and urban communities throughout the country. I'd also like for us to think about the courageous work of Ida Bell Wells Barnett, civil rights activist, journalist, educator, and the anti-lynching campaigns that she led in her lifetime. Margaret Burroughs was the founder of the DuSable African American Museum, which was the first African American museum to open in the United States. She was born in St. Rose, Louisiana. I was very, very excited to meet her back in 1995, a year after I opened the River Road African American Museum. What I've come to know and to understand as I looked over the last couple of years and looking at the Black Lives Matter movement as the world became introduced to Black Lives Matter, what I realized is that the founders of African American museums like myself and Margaret Burroughs for the past 60 years always knew that Black lives mattered. The first place that you learn about Black history is at home. So as we are being threatened in these most recent months by the removal of Black history books from the shelves of libraries in places like Florida and Virginia, and who knows where else or what other states will soon be attacked, where books will be removed from the shelves of the public libraries in their towns and cities. I want to say that we must absolutely start to document our own family histories in our own homes and teach children how to do genealogy and get children to understand that not only was Martin Luther King a part of the civil rights movement, but they may find too that an aunt or an uncle or a grandmother or a grandfather participated in the civil rights movement. I also think about my mother, who was a domestic cleaning a doctor's office in her early 20s in Slidell, Louisiana. My mother then went on to graduate from Lolly Kemp Hospital to become an LPN and was the first Black nurse at East Ascension Hospital. I think about my aunts from New Roads to Slidell to New Orleans, who were not only beauticians and teachers, but they were also entrepreneurs, owning stores, somewhat similar to today's convenience stores, and delis and restaurants. If we think about the amount of money that we spend today, as much as $1.8 trillion in the Black beauty industry as consumers, we must realize that as our ancestors of the past knew that education was the key, we must also put in the forefront and think about economic freedom as being the key to the success of our children and our grandchildren. I am very, very fortunate to work and to know 25 of the smartest and most courageous women in the state of Louisiana. And among those women are some of the women who are on this panel today. I would like to say hello to my sister friend, Sharon Levine downriver in St. James. I would like to say hello and thank you for the words of encouragement to Chief Justice Burnett Johnson from Donaldsonville. Hello, Sonny Patterson. And of course, thank you so much to Dr. Angela Allen Bell for inviting me and for always being there for me when I need some words of encouragement, when I feel as though I can't get up and make it another day. I say that there is no knee on my neck. And if you think about 188 women and girls who were lynched, as I said before, between 1838 and 1969, what we have to endure today, or what we think we are enduring today, is so minute compared to what our mothers, our grandmothers, our great-great-grandmothers, and our foremothers had to endure. I am inspired and encouraged by the history that I read about their lives. I am the founder of the River Road African American Museum, which will celebrate its 30th year anniversary next year in 2024. The reason I started the museum was because when I moved back to Louisiana from Southern California, I realized that the state of Louisiana, through the tourism industry, promoted what is known as plantation tourism. And there was no mention of our Black ancestors on any of these plantation tours. So after talking to curators and other museum founders around the country and becoming a member of the Association of African American Museums, where there are 125 African American museum members, I decided to start the museum on March 12th of 1994. Since then, I received my master's degree from Southern University in New Orleans in museum studies. Southern University in New Orleans has one of the only, I believe it may be now, the only HBCU to have a graduate program in museum studies. This is where I learned the business of museology. I am a public historian and a preservationist and a part of the first generation of professional curators, Black curators in the world. I recently accepted a position as the interim executive director of the Amistad Research Center at Tulane University. The Amistad Research Center is the second largest repository of rare books, rare manuscripts, art, and documents in the world, only second to the Schomburg Research Center in Harlem. I want to say that our ancestors coming into freedom out of emancipation knew that education was the key. I want to say that we must do better as a people. We absolutely must do better as parents, as grandparents, and as community leaders to ensure that our children understand and don't forget education still remains the key to our success. I think about what has discouraged me most in the past 30 years being a public historian here in the sugarcane plantation petrochemical industry of South Louisiana. What discourages me most is the disparity in philanthropy and the disparity in resources that are made available to our nonprofit organization and other African American-led nonprofit organizations around the country. We may write grant after grant after grant, asking for $25,000, $250,000, and in some cases even $2 million, only to find that the African American nonprofits across this country get less than 1% of the total proceeds that are offered to philanthropic through philanthropy here in the United States. When I'm discouraged, I remember the history and I think about Sandra Bland, and I think about Breonna Taylor, and I think about Ida B. Wells. I think about my mother, my aunts, my grandmother. I think about your grandmothers and your great-grandmothers who I don't even know and have never even read about. I'm given the courage to speak out in meetings and places where sometimes I'm the only African-American person and the only African-American woman speaking out as a preservationist in a world where our history is so often forgotten and neglected. I am the one to speak out and say that this is not just Black history. This is American history. This is Louisiana history. This is world history. As long as we live on this earth as Black people, the history cannot be erased. And as long as I live on this earth, I will guarantee you, as a Black woman, in the honor of the spirits of our ancestors and the oldest human remains ever found on this earth, the woman known as Lucy, whose bones were found in the southernmost part of Africa, I say that our history cannot be erased. I want to say to the law students there at Southern University Law Center, you must learn to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, stand up straight, hold your head up, look people straight in the eye, and always keep moving forward. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this panel.
We appreciate everyone who has partnered with us today. It is our hope that we have answered who women really are. And I quote, "She is a wild woman." I challenge each partner to do the work of narrative change and memorialization. First, to every partner, let's use inclusive language instead of gender nouns that have created stereotypes that has been used to oppress women. An example of this is to challenge legislators to change language that can be found in our own Constitution that says all men are created equal, to all men and women are created equal. To our men partners, when you see a woman being discriminated against, don't remain silent. Advocate for those gender equitable policies in the workplace by calling for those pay audits. To our parents, let's deconstruct gender stereotypes and prevent biases. Let's change the narratives and stop saying things like, boys don't cry, or girls, you should be in the kitchen cooking and cleaning. To our future lawyer leaders, let us not forget the work of narrative change by calling upon our officials to call a public health crisis that addresses the trauma that women have experienced. This will put more equitable policies in place that will create better healthcare, pay, and rights for all women. Finally, to every woman, man, and child, let us memorialize the past by sharing the true counter-narratives of how resilient women really are and how they have overcome their trauma while having a knee placed on their neck by being the first African-American justice on Louisiana's Supreme Court, to being the founder of the first African-American museum, to even being a professor of law and an expert on race and law, to being an environmental justice advocate, and even an internationally acclaimed poet activist. Please remember that remaining silent or doing nothing is just as damaging as holding a knee on their neck. We want to take a moment and acknowledge our own MC, Johnny Ross, who has been an ally in this struggle for gender equality. Next, Brittany Dunn, who is our technical wizard, and SULC's evening division representatives, Victoria Grant, Bree Sweat, and Shantizia Johnson. Thank you all.
Thank you, Josie, for closing us out. And at this time, I would like to again thank our esteemed panelists for your contribution today, your words of wisdom. We are just blown away by all that you have shared. Our participants, at this time, we would like to open it up for a Q&A as we are running ahead of schedule. So we have some time to open it up. We would love to hear from you so that way we can get your questions answered. If you would like to speak on the call of action you just heard, please feel free to join in. We would love to continue this conversation with you. We have several comments in the chat. If you would like to be unmuted, please do so, and we can continue this conversation. I saw several. Please go ahead and use under your reactions. You'll see an option to raise your hand. We will get you unmuted, or you may unmute yourself at this time and jump in with your comments or questions for our panelists if you do have them. I see someone just said they are overwhelmed by the power of our presentation. Thank you so much for that.
I see Reverend Anderson's hand up. Reverend Anderson, you're free to speak.
Good afternoon. I'm blown away. I'm blown away. Professor Bell knows if I was in the room with y'all, I'd be kissing some hymns because I'm overwhelmed. And I just want to say what I said multiple times in the chat. This has to be rebroadcast. This has to be shared in Head Starts, in elementary schools, in middle schools. Because when we don't tell our story and we don't plan it on our children and we don't plan it early so other folk can't fill their heads up with other things, they don't receive it later. And so I just want to say to all the amazing speakers, thank you. Thank you for being willing to take a hit so that the next generation can soar. So thank you so much for this.
Hello, my name is Tanaya, and I had a couple of questions that I put in the chat. But my first question was, how can we overcome the challenges of other Black and brown females and males having their knees on each other necks? I see that a lot at the Lawson.
I'll go ahead unless someone else wishes to answer that. Do we have any other panelists that would like to ask how we address the issue of Black on Black knee on necks? And we don't mean in violent ways, just in the everyday we exist with each other, power struggles, abuse of power. Anyone else? So one of the things that we discuss in Law and Racism is that when this country originated, it did some profound damage by introducing the notion of racial hierarchies. And those hierarchies assess value to people based on race. And the hierarchies, we all understand, create tension between Blacks and whites because of the power disparity that has existed since chattel slavery. We often, though, overlook in those conversations the way the system of chattel slavery also caused the internal power dynamic between people of color. And so that division that would cause certain people to have to work outdoors in the heat and privilege other people to be able to work indoors, it made us adapt to understanding that when we're under a power structure where we have no power, we begin to negotiate. So how do we survive that type of hierarchy? A lot of times we adopt a viewpoint of the overseer or the master, so that we can please this person in power just to be able to exist under that type of power dynamic. That is really understudied the way that harm has now caused us not to be able to interact healthy with each other. And so one of the things we study in Law and Racism is how racism really crushes the ability of all people to value other people, whether it is Black people or white people or any other group in the country. And so the first thing that you've done today that's significant is acknowledging that hierarchy has created now this internal struggle between people of color trying to battle for the little bit power that they can, of course, possess. We want to start thinking about what we call colonial mentality and how we have learned to be able to adapt to the mindset of the oppressor in order to survive oppression. We have not explored that harm and begin the process of undoing it. And so the question raises the important first component, which is just acknowledge the problem. And then secondarily, to begin to understand the hierarchies. They were based on no science and no logic. And so we're a nation that has spent all of our journey believing that people should be assessed based on race and color when there's no science or biology to support the notion of race or color. So we now have to go and deconstruct all of this false teaching that we have been cultured to adopt and believe. And so we are uneducating, unlearning, unthinking all of these lies and myths that we've been fed. And as we do that, we begin to understand that there is no color, there is no race, there is no differences that would define people to justify the difference in treatment. And once we start to deconstruct all of this false teaching, we begin to understand that really we are a body of humans and that human rights is our goal. And that is where we should be measuring ourselves as a society, not based on this false racial hierarchy that should not exist.
Yes.
So that's the story at the moment, is just being honest enough to have the conversation. And I can affirm for you, because I've had 2 careers now, one where I was the only Black attorney working in a majority white environment, and one where I'm working in a majority Black environment. And I can affirm for you, the trauma of working with people who look like you can be worse. And in my experience, it was worse than working in environments where I was the only Black person. So I want to affirm that that is a struggle for all of us now, and it is traumatizing and it's painful. And it stems from us as a society not recognizing that this human hierarchy, what it does is assign to people value based on color, value based on gender. And we have to abandon that model that has no basis in science or logic. Ms. Taylor?
Good afternoon. I just wanted to say that I really thoroughly enjoyed everything that I heard today. I was really intrigued with Ms. Hambrick about the telling of the history of your children and grandchildren and teaching them about where they come from and their genealogy. And that's one of the things I've been doing with my grandson. He often say, yeah, he calls me Yaya, you know a lot of people. And I notice you know all your people, you know, your mama people, your daddy people. And my family members often tell me I'm like the family historian. You need to write this down, because if when you leave, we won't know much. So that's very important. I was reared that way. You have to know where you come from so you'll know where you're going. My grandmother always said, you know where you've been, but you don't know where you're going. And so we want to make sure that our children know their history. And it was taught to us so that we wouldn't, you know, mess around and fool with some of our family members and not know who they are. That was kind of the premise for that. But I just think it is important that we know who we are and where we come from, and that we respect one another in our cultures, and know that we are all important. We're all can contribute to society in some type of way. I hate that we had to go through some of the things we did as a people. And because of that, what you mentioned, Dr. Bell, earlier, a few minutes ago, you know, that self-hate, that self, You know, I've been in similar situations as well, and it is painful when we talk about race and self-hate. So I think we should often lift one another up if you know, along the way. Thank you again. I thoroughly enjoyed everyone today. Beautiful information.
I see a hand up from Ms. Kent.
Good afternoon. I said I wasn't going to speak, but of course, Professor Bell, I can't help myself. Two things resonated with me on today's panel. The first was in your opening remarks where you said Black women are often typecast and relegated to having roles where you were thought of to be a perpetual caretaker, a giver, and you're not allowed to explore self-gratification and self-actualization and self-care. That is still imputed on us today. So I want to remind everyone on this call that there's nothing wrong with working towards your own satisfaction and comfort in your pursuit of success. And the second thing I want to say is that I want to remind all of the students on the call to remember to not take for granted the progress we've made. Of course, Justice Johnson told us that now we don't have an issue with seats being available, seats in school, or even a seat at the table at work. However, we are often used to window dress. So I tend to remind myself, once I get the seat at the table, I have to use my voice, because that is why we're needed in these rooms, whether it is a courtroom, classroom, or a boardroom. So once you get that seat at the table and you keep that seat at the table, make sure you always use your voice at the table, and don't forget to reach back and pull other women ahead with you.
Thank you. Any additional comments or questions before we conclude? I see Tolliver's. Okay, no, that's not a question. Anyone else? No further questions or comments? I see someone is trying to come off of mute in the chat, Sonia M. Jalen?
Thank you, Professor Bell. It looks like we do not have any additional questions at this time. So again, this will conclude our presentation for today. Again, it has been an esteemed pleasure to be with you guys today. I hope the action plan that you have heard today will resonate with you, and you will continue to do the work and become an agent of change. We will make the link available to rewatch. We will get that out to you. So be on the lookout. We will continue to share that link via our social media websites, and we'll get that out to you. So at this time, if you do not have any additional questions, we will give you back the rest of your day. Thank you, and God bless.